The moon, a jaundiced eye peering through the tattered veil of clouds, cast a sickly pallor over the clearing. It bathed the twisted, skeletal forms of the ancient oaks in an almost luminescent glow. Their leafless branches reached like gnarled claws into the night, each grotesque silhouette a monstrous caricature against the sickly moonlight. A faint wind snaked through the clearing, not a cleansing breeze, but a stale breath that carried a promise of secrets long kept and the faint, acrid stench of decay. It rustled through withered leaves that carpeted the ground, their whispers sounding like the faint, accusing sighs of the dead. In the heart of this unsettling space, a fire flickered, its flames barely illuminating the darkness, casting monstrous shadows that danced and writhed against the ancient stones. The fire itself seemed less a source of warmth and more a malevolent eye, its orange glow mirroring the hunger of the monstrous power waiting to be unleashed. The flames didn't flicker naturally, but surged and writhed, as though fueled by the darkness itself. It cast long, grotesque shadows that danced in macabre mimicry of the cloaked figures circling it. These figures moved with a disturbing fluidity, drawn to the monstrous heartbeat of the flames. Their motions weren't the measured steps of dancers, nor the desperate frenzy of the terrified, but rather something sinuous and unsettling, like shadows given a grotesque mockery of life. With each twist and sway, the cloaks shifted, momentarily revealing glimpses of skeletal hands and forms too lean to be entirely human. They were both puppeteers of the ritual and puppets themselves, their movements guided by the ravenous power building within the circle. Their chanting resonated in the clearing, a low, guttural drone devoid of recognizable language. Yet, it was the absence of words that made it more potent, stripping away any veneer of human ritual and leaving the raw hunger behind. The sounds they uttered were both ancient and inhuman, resonating with a power that seemed to seep from the earth itself, a dark echo from a time before civilization. Each syllable throbbed in the air, a rhythmic assault that bypassed comprehension and clawed instead at something primal. The dissonance in their chant wasn't musical, but visceral, a symphony of unease designed to break down the listener's sanity and make them more susceptible to the darkness they sought to summon. At the center of the gathering stood a figure draped in crimson, so dark it seemed to drink in the surrounding pale light. Even amongst the cloaked figures, this one commanded attention. Their posture was rigid, unnaturally upright, as though the weight of the ritual rested solely upon their shoulders. From beneath the deep cowl, a single, blood-red eye gleamed, a baleful star pulsing with a terrible sentience. This was their leader, the architect of the ritual, the conduit through which their twisted devotion drew forth a power as ancient as it was profane. Their crimson robe, once perhaps a symbol of authority, seemed stained with more than mere dye. It rippled and shifted as if infused with an energy that strained at its confines. The air around them throbbed with a malevolent intensity, causing the lesser cultists to shuffle back a step, a mixture of reverence and abject terror twisting their features. A whimper cut through the chanting, a pathetic squeak of rebellion against the monstrous symphony around her. A young woman, bound to a moss-covered altar, thrashed against her restraints. Her eyes, impossibly wide, reflected the firelight back as twin orbs of terror that seemed to burn from within. Sweat and tears streaked her face, leaving muddy puddles through the ritualistic markings that covered her exposed skin. The intricate symbols pulsed faintly, as if the power coursing through the clearing sought to leach into her very flesh, branding her as an offering. Her struggles grew weaker with each passing moment, her primal fear a discordant counterpoint to the cult's relentless chanting. The crimson-cloaked figure stepped closer, skeletal hands reaching for a bone-handled dagger that gleamed with an unholy light. The dagger wasn't a mere tool, but an extension of the darkness, its rough-hewn blade etched with symbols that pulsed with a sickly energy. The chanting intensified, a suffocating wall of sound that sought to drown out the woman's screams. Her pleas, now ragged and edged with despair, were a pitiful testament to humanity against the rising tide of monstrous hunger. Yet, her terror was a part of the ritual, her fear adding fuel to the darkness they sought to unleash. The crimson-cloaked leader raised the dagger, its tip glinting with a promise of agony. The woman's screams became a strangled sob, her body going limp for a single horrifying heartbeat, as if the sheer magnitude of her fear had momentarily stolen her strength. The dagger flashed downwards, a swift motion that silenced her cries. Blood oozed through the air, gleaming like a crimson halo in the warped light of the fire. The scent of it, coppery and sickeningly sweet, mingled with the corrupt stench of the ritual, creating a perverse symphony of death. The woman's body jerked, then twitched violently against her bonds, the movement not born of life, but a grotesque echo of the power surging through her. Her skin seemed to shimmer, the ritual markings on her flesh turning from pulsing symbols into seeping wounds. The chanting reached a crescendo, a final discordant wail of triumph, as something ripped free from the confines of the woman's broken body, not a spirit, nor any recognizable form, but a tendril of inky darkness wreathed in the oily sheen of spilled blood. It twisted upwards, drawn inexorably towards the heart of the ritual circle. The dagger pulsed with malevolent energy, as though slaking a monstrous thirst with the blood upon its blade. The woman's final scream echoed, then faded into the heavy silence that fell across the clearing. It was not the silence of completion, but the brief stillness before a storm breaks. The first sacrifice was complete, a grotesque tribute laid at the feet of the darkness. A wave of change swept through the gathered figures. Their movements, once hesitant, now pulsed with a terrible energy. Their chanting, fueled by blood and a desperate, fanatical fervor, throbbed with renewed intensity. One by one, robed figures stepped forward, each bearing an offering. A goblet filled with a shimmering, viscous liquid. A weathered grimoire opened to a page of monstrous sigils. A shard of obsidian pulsating with an unsettling rhythm. Each offering was placed with ritualistic precision around the altar, forming a macabre tribute to whatever power they sought to summon. The chanting morphed, shifting from a steady drone into a dissonant series of guttural utterances and discordant cries. The effect was chilling, stripping away any veneer of civilized ritual and exposing the raw hunger for power at the cult's core. The crimson-cloaked leader raised the now bloodied dagger towards the heavens. Moonlight gleamed in its blade, a twisted reflection of the power building below. Shadows writhed even in the dim light, drawn to the concentration of dark energy. The air grew heavy, a suffocating pressure promising something monstrous was on the verge of manifesting. A collective gasp rippled through the gathering. Just beyond the warped ring of firelight, a figure emerged from the shadows, tall, skeletal, its form wreathed in darkness that seemed to pulse in unison with the cult's frenzied chanting. Its eyes, twin pools of obsidian, fixed with terrifying intensity on the crimson-cloaked leader. Had their twisted ritual been successful? Was this the entity they had been summoning, the embodiment of their dark desires? The shadow that birthed it was no mere absence of light, but a suffocating presence, a monstrous void that swallowed the flickering firelight whole. Within that inky expanse, the skeletal form of Naraka coalesced. Bone gleamed dully, each joint and rib a grotesque mockery of life. Yet, it was the eyes that commanded terror. Twin pits in its skull, filled with an inferno of crimson that promised endless torment. It moved with a sinuous grace that was at odds with its macabre form. Ancient muscles, no longer mere flesh, but something infused with shadow and hunger, rippled beneath its taut, pale skin. The air crackled, not just with residual ritual power, but with the sheer intensity of its being. It was a creature not of flesh and blood, but of hunger, given monstrous form. The very air around Naraka seemed to warp and shiver, as if reality itself struggled against its presence. A stench of decay, of forgotten graveyards, and something far fouler clung to it. It was an assault on the senses, a physical manifestation of the darkness it embodied. The cult's frenzied chanting sputtered, then fell agonizingly silent. Eyes widened with a mixture of unhinged ecstasy and bone-deep terror. Some, the most fanatical, sank to their knees. Their cries transformed from ritualistic fervor into sobs of pure, unquestioning devotion. A few even threw themselves towards the monstrous form, their outstretched hands a futile yet chilling plea for acceptance into its monstrous embrace. Others recoiled, their faith a flimsy shield against the true monstrosity they'd unleashed. They mouthed desperate prayers, the words faltering on their lips. These were the ones who had envisioned power and glory, and now the true cost of their ambition clawed at their sanity. Yet, even amidst the chaos, the crimson-cloaked leader stood tall. For a fleeting moment, a flicker of doubt, perhaps even fear, ghosted across their features, but it was swiftly suppressed, replaced by a mask of grim determination. They had toiled too long, sacrificed too much, to falter at the final threshold. Reaching out a trembling hand, the leader rasped, "Master, we have awakened you." Their voice cracked, yet they forced themselves to continue. "The world is your feast." It was part proclamation, part desperate plea, a testament to their terrifying ambition and the terrible, fragile hope that in the jaws of the monster they unleashed, they might find salvation rather than destruction. The silence that followed the leader's words was heavy, a pregnant pause before the jaws of the nightmare snapped shut. Then Naraka moved, not with the ponderous gait of a giant, but the blurring speed of a starved predator. The girl who broke from the circle never stood a chance. She barely managed a strangled scream before a skeletal hand, tipped with claws like obsidian shards, closed around her throat. She thrashed, eyes bulging with terror, but it was the frantic fluttering of a moth trapped within a spider's web. Naraka yanked her closer, its crimson eyes boring into her with terrible intensity. The chanting resumed, but now it was a chorus born of dread, a desperate plea for mercy from the creature they had just praised. The girl's scream cut off with a sickening gurgle. With a swift, casual twist, Naraka snapped her neck. Her body went limp, dangling from its monstrous grip like a discarded doll. Yet, the horror was far from over. Naraka tilted its head, a mockery of a curious gesture. Tendrils of shadow snaked from its form, wrapping around the girl's corpse, stripping the flesh from bone in seconds. A guttural, wet, tearing sound echoed through the clearing, mingling with the horrified whimpers of the cult members. Within moments, only bones remained, gleaming obscenely white in the firelight. It tossed the remnants aside with disdain, already focused on its next quarry. The crimson-cloaked leader stood firm, but their hands shook ever so slightly, betraying the terror they sought to suppress. The rest of the cult was frozen, their faith shattered against the gruesome display. They had summoned a true monster, an insatiable hunger that had no care for their devotion. Now, trapped within the confines of their own ritual, they awaited their turn. Each ragged breath became a countdown to their inevitable doom. The crimson-cloaked leader, once the embodiment of terrifying control, faltered. Sweat traced a path down their face, a stark contrast to their ritual attire. The carefully crafted mask of power had cracked, revealing the desperate human beneath. Wait. Their voice was a broken rasp, choked with a plea born more from despair than any true belief it would be heard. "I can offer more. There are other rituals, more power." They gestured wildly towards the untouched offerings, the untouched pages of the monstrous grimoire. Naraka tilted its head, a grotesque parody of curiosity. It took a single, measured step closer, skeletal feet crunching on scattered bones. The leader's facade shattered entirely. With a strangled sob, they threw themselves to their knees. "Please," the crimson-cloaked leader whimpered, "spare me. I can serve you." A low chuckle echoed in the clearing, a dry, rasping sound that seemed to leach warmth from the very air. The cultists huddled closer, their fear mingling strangely with a perverse fascination. It had been years since they'd last heard that chilling sound, the amused rumble vibrating from the depths of Naraka's skeletal chest. But their pleas fell on deaf ears, or perhaps on ears that found amusement in such pathetic displays. Naraka moved with blinding speed. Claws flashed in the firelight, a blur of lethal obsidian. The leader's scream echoed for a heartbeat, then choked off with an unnatural finality. Silence descended, punctuated by the ragged gasps of the surviving cultists. The air stank of blood, fear, and the lingering scent of something utterly inhuman. All their meticulous planning, their sacrifices, everything had been for nothing. In the face of Naraka's monstrous hunger, they were as insignificant as ants beneath a giant's boot. The crimson-cloaked leader, their body a broken, bloody ruin, was testament to their folly.